All right, welcome back to part two of today's What About Nutrition on Westplex Radio. Steve Casper alongside Mr. Nutrition himself, David Gall of O'Fallon Nutrition. And again, go to their website at actually O'FallonNutrition.com, and they do have archived these shows from Westplex Radio. So you can, if this is your first time tuning in, you're interested about supplements and things like that in your body and your family's health, go check it out, O'FallonNutrition.com. All right, Dave, go ahead.
Well, hey, so we were talking about adrenal exhaustion, and we talked about how the early stage of adrenal exhaustion is a situation where you're tired but wired. And I bet we have listeners right now that go, that sounds familiar.
You know what? I decided that'd be a great name for a rock band CD.
Oh, yes,
that'd be their
definitely.
album. In fact, I'm going to steal that.
Greatest hits of Tired But Wired.
I'm working on a CD right now. Yeah, Tired But Wired.
Listen to our hit Up All Night, right?
Exactly. I love it.
So in the first stages of adrenal exhaustion, the body tends to have this tired but wired feeling. The adrenals are manufacturing a little too much of the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And if somebody had a saliva test, they would have that kind of test result, too much cortisol. And so those folks tend to benefit from the B-complex vitamins, particularly vitamin B5 as well as vitamin C, and calming things. So that's where amino acids like GABA can come in, kind of mop up the excess adrenaline, help the person to feel calm, and that way we don't have to have as many panicky situations or anxiety provoking situations where the adrenal glands are forced to react again. So if we don't overreact to situations, that can also kind of help to give our adrenals a little rest, so to speak. Now, I also mentioned that there's herbs that can be useful, and these fall into a category called adaptogens. So this is a really fun herb category, and if you're just starting to learn about herbs, it's one of the great first ones to learn about. The most famous adaptogen is an herb called ginseng, which just about everybody has heard of. And what the adaptogens do, if we had an herbal medicine textbook here, it would say that the adaptogens help the glands of the body adapt to stress. That's actually by definition what they are. And the adrenals are one of the glands of the body. We also have glands like the thyroid gland and the pituitary gland, and the ovaries are glands, etc. But here today we're talking about the adrenals. And so in the case of some of these adaptogenic herbs, such as an herb called rhodiola that was originally found in Siberia, and it was used, the story goes, if you Google it, supposedly the Soviet military used it for their fighter pilots as an alternative to amphetamines. And it was an herb they could use to help keep these guys awake, but actually kept them calm. And the story also goes that the amphetamines weren't so ideal because they would tend to create pilots that might be a little trigger happy or a little likely to do something that they didn't want them to do. Mm-hmm. So the Soviet military turned to rhodiola, which is one of their native herbs. And now rhodiola is used a lot in herbal therapy for helping to balance the adrenals and help to improve stamina while kind of calming somebody at the same time. It's perfect for those folks that are tired but wired. Mm-hmm. And we have a product called Adrenal Health by Gaia Herbs at O'Fallon Nutrition that features this rhodiola along with an herb called holy basil, as well as an herb called ashwagandha that's actually known to help improve thyroid function, specifically production of T3. And ashwagandha in studies lowers levels of cortisol very reliably. And finally, there's an herb, combination of two herbs, magnolia and philodendron, known as Relora, that's also been the subject of many clinical studies on lowering cortisol. Various companies sell it, but we do have it at O'Fallon Nutrition. So basic adrenal exhaustion often can really benefit from some of these adaptogenic herbs, usually just one or two or a little combo formula, as well as good old B-complex vitamins, possibly with extra vitamin B5 and B1. And then, from my perspective, fairly large amounts of vitamin C, but everybody's got different opinions on that, so I won't try to quote doses. So those are all things that can be really supportive, and the reason they're supportive is that these are nutrients in the case of the B vitamins and vitamin C that actually help with the production of cortisol. And then these herbs can help the glands to adapt and cope with stress. Things like GABA can calm you. And let's not forget, like we said in the first segment, that we want to have balanced blood sugar. So just like we talked about in that blood sugar episode, which if our listeners haven't heard, it would be wonderful to go online at O'FallonNutrition.com and hear the hypoglycemia episode. But the point is that instability of blood sugar, or blood sugar crashes, whatever you want to call them, force the adrenal glands to react and release adrenaline and cortisol. And if we stomp on those poor adrenal glands too many times, eventually even worse things happen, which is they can't produce enough cortisol and adrenaline.
Wow.
So this is called stage 2 and 3 adrenal exhaustion. And this is kind of technical, but hopefully we're simplifying this enough that it can make sense. And what I want our listeners to take away is that the situation known as stage 2 and 3 adrenal exhaustion, if somebody were to have saliva tests of their hormones such as cortisol and DHEA, in these later stages 2 and 3, they would start to see drops in cortisol. So cortisol, for example, in stage 3 of adrenal exhaustion is very, very low. And what this reflects is that the adrenal gland has been so overworked for so long that now it can't even make enough cortisol to do its job. And then you start having real issues. Cortisol actually helps to control inflammation in the body, so these people tend to become very inflamed. Sometimes it can cause inflammation of the thyroid gland called thyroiditis, which we'll talk about a little bit in our next show. So we don't want this stage to, we don't want to have to get to this point if we don't have to. That said, if somebody suspected they were in really late stage adrenal exhaustion, they could have one of these cortisol tests, but symptom-wise, they would probably feel very, very tired most of the time. They would probably feel like they had to live off of stimulants like caffeine and sugar just to keep functioning at all. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the supplements that are used. Some of our listeners might be familiar with that. So for later stages of adrenal exhaustion, we actually use things that, for example, can promote a little bit more cortisol. So one of those herbs is licorice root. Licorice root is really cool. It's powerful. What it does is it slows down how quickly our cortisol breaks down. So again, this is only for folks that are really, really super exhausted, late stage adrenal, but they can use this herb called licorice root, and it'll actually help the small amounts of cortisol they make last a little longer. Okay, so it can kind of prop them up. Medically, some of these folks are actually treated with cortisol. So this is a method that can happen before that. Let their own cortisol last a little longer. And of course, we mentioned that vitamin B5 is required to manufacture cortisol, so is vitamin C. There's also supplements that have adrenal cortex from animals actually in them. So, for example, at our store, we sell 3 or 4 different products that combine licorice root with vitamin C, vitamin B5, and a little bit of freeze-dried animal adrenal gland in there.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild.
Okay, so this is part of alternative medicine known as glandular therapy.
Yeah.
And it's this concept called like cures like, but the idea from a technical perspective is that there's very tiny, tiny amounts of the adrenal hormones in the freeze-dried animal adrenal gland that's in some of these supplements. Now, again, this is for folks that are totally wiped out. If we did this with somebody in the early stages of adrenal exhaustion where they're tired but wired, they still have that wired sensation, they would be overstimulated. Last week, just for the fun of it, I took a product we have called Adrenalplex at the store, which is an awesome product, but it's really our most powerful one. And it was a way for me to kind of, let's see if I have this later stage of adrenal exhaustion or not. And I was pretty sure I didn't, so I only took 1 instead of 2. And long story short, I was pretty wired that whole day on this product. I was a little bit too kind of assertive and aggressive, a little snappy, so it was too much for me. But somebody that was really wiped out with a later stage of adrenal exhaustion, it might really help them to come back to life. I also want to mention that the adrenal glands make a hormone called DHEA. And DHEA is a precursor to hormones like estrogen and testosterone, particularly testosterone. And both sexes make DHEA in their adrenal glands. Now, when DHEA levels become very low, we can have difficulty with weight gain, we can have issues with libido, we can have poor mood. So DHEA is something to know about. I've read in different books that the majority of testosterone in women is manufactured from DHEA that's been made in the adrenal glands. So every once in a while we'll come up with hormone imbalance that people will talk about a little bit low testosterone in women. They don't need a lot, but they need a little tiny bit. And they get it from DHEA in the adrenals. And my point is that if their adrenals are very exhausted, they won't be able to make enough DHEA, and that'll show up in saliva tests. or sometimes blood tests as well. And if DHEA is too low, they can have issues with mood and libido and things like that.
Yeah, I know a lot of women have way too much testosterone. Just way too much. So just the right amount is good
Just the right amount is perfect.
Right.
And then finally, there's another hormone known as pregnenolone, which is also available as a supplement, and it's a precursor to DHEA. And sometimes it's built into some of these more aggressive, hardcore adrenal products in order to rebuild folks. Now, the staff at O'Fallon Nutrition has been thoroughly trained in all of this, even trained recently, and we've been using the book The Diet Cure by Julia Ross as the foundation of that.
Right.
So I want everybody to know listening, they don't have to memorize all of that. I'm just kind of walking you through the basics of this, and I know it's complex, but our staff at O'Fallon Nutrition is familiar with it, and the point is that there's different protocols for different levels. There's that first stage, tired but wired, and in later stages, folks are truly exhausted and their hormones are low when you test them, specifically hormones like cortisol and DHEA. And we can help you work through this at the store. We've also got books that get into this subject that are fun to read, that are not too technical, and we'd really like to help you. My final point would be you want to make sure you try to have balanced blood sugar. You want to have fat or protein or fiber with your carbohydrates.
Right.
You want to eat breakfast.
Yeah.
And then you may want to consider using nutrients such as chromium and vitamin B1 or even things like cinnamon to help balance your blood sugar.
Yeah. Love cinnamon. Cinnamon, we could do a whole show on that.
Oh, good stuff.
Folks, you're listening to our final moments here on this weekend. What About Nutrition with David Gall of O'Fallon Nutrition. O'FallonNutrition.com. You can catch some archive shows. And we're going to be back next week with another program for you. So make sure you listen every Saturday to Westplex 94.1 at 10 o'clock and also 100.7 FM every Sunday at 10 a.m. And both radio stations stream online as well. Steve Casper saying bye-bye for now and until next time.
Hey, thanks a lot, everybody, for listening. And whataboutnutrition@gmail.com if you've got questions or comments for email.
That's whataboutnutrition@gmail.com. See you, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks a lot.